there's a reneging of the social contract. So an agreement between us as citizens and the people that we have selected to so-called lead us. We actually demand certain things from them, rightfully so, for our votes, right, and for our taxes. And I think that probably for the last 40 or so years, that social contract has been gradually eroded, and the trust in that social contract has been eroded. And I think that's partly purposeful. And one of the reasons why I think that's purposeful is because what essentially political leadership has done is started to wash its hands of the services it should provide its citizens, certainly in the UK and the US and parts of Western Europe. Parts of other parts of the world as well, but I don't really know that much about the rest of the world, so I wouldn't want to speak too much about it. But certainly a political system that we, as the three of us, and probably most of your audience listening to, have had experience of. It used to be that our political leaders would be participants within the construction of a kind of life world that we live in, and think about like things like public service as part of that. Public service and public services. And I think that what that's done is essentially it's the move towards privatization, right? It's the move towards supplanting the things that should be supplied by the state, things that are going to be supplied by UK So transport, water, those sorts of things. Now we've seen the kind of disastrous effects that has, like, in the UK alone, we have terrible rivers and the sea, surfers against sewage. I grew up in a world where surfers against sewage won. Like when I was younger, I remember surfers against sewage having success of making our seas clean and making our beaches clean for people to swim in the sea. And it's gone backwards. And I think that's partly neglect, and that's partly purposeful. And the purpose is essentially to push the responsibility towards the private sector in order to create an enrichment opportunity for some people. And so that kind of reneging of responsibility that's from the top down. Like, that's just absolutely from the top down. And I think you probably see this amongst leaders throughout all walks of life. And I think also what you see is this idea of being able, like slipperiness, not being held to account.
Slopey shoulders.
Yeah, having the capacity to do something and not get blamed for it. We have political leaders in the world today who literally are convicted of some of the most heinous crimes, basically because I think we've just got to a situation around leadership, actually, where it's like, it's not actually my responsibility. I don't care. I don't know what you think. I can make these promises in order to get elected, but I'm not going to fulfill those promises, and you can't do anything about it. So there's a real a significant amount of impunity. That, for me, is not what leadership is. Because leadership is first and foremost about taking responsibility and having responsibility. So, I think we are in a time where we are lacking in a kind of sense of leadership amongst the political class. But that's interestingly left, or has produced, a kind of crisis within the kind of concept of leadership, where probably the reason why you are doing this podcast, and the reason why you care about leadership, and the reason that people actually, are thinking about this kind of concept of leadership again and reanalyzing it and critiquing it, is because we have a crisis of leadership at the top. So perhaps this is laying fertile ground for the next generation of people coming through who may be able to think more clearly about what that actually means. And actually, I teach people who are 20 years younger than me, 15 years younger than me, and I am so hopeful about that generation, because they're just so much more engaged, I think, than I was at that age, perhaps. I mean, I'm a bit of an anomaly in a sense that obviously I, pursued education and so forth, but yeah, just like it's a good group coming through now, a good cohort.